Yes, so right, what's aspheric then?
Is that what I've got written down here is complex curve profiles reduces spherical irregularity, allows it to look flatter, thinner and lighter, looks better as thinner and lighter, less blur and distortion, less effect on facial features.
Okay, so you read that out of your training guide.
Yes.
So what is distortion?
Is that like when you're getting annoyed and frustrated? Kind of?
It distorts when it's out of
Distortion.
focus.
So
Oh.
I suppose, if you like, with this poor wine glass, you can sort of see, because this is not a really good lens form,
Yeah.
it creates distortion, quite obviously so, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Everything's, so it did make it sort of bigger, but it made it all distorted because it's not keeping the image the way the image should be. So distortion
Yeah.
is meaning it's
Not
bent,
right.
wobbly, not right, all the rest of it. Not just bigger, because bigger is a distortion, but if it's bigger evenly, we just call that magnification.
Yeah.
Or if it's smaller evenly, we call that. But if it's bigger but not evenly bigger across the images, and some bits are bigger or twisted or just distorted, if they're not quite regular and even, that's distortion. So aspheric is designed to basically try and make the lens thinner, but it has that advantage too, that if we do that process cleverly, we can actually design the lens to try and reduce distortion, particularly in the peripheral part of the lens, so that when the image comes in from the non-standard place, and this does get a little bit technical, so I'll quickly, so remember we've always got our hand over sheets always there to help us a little bit. What is aspheric? So that was my questions were, what is aspheric? I suppose let's first of all finish off the question, because it might have not have been on the video. What is grind? Well, grind, or which lenses need to be ground? Well, basically everything's grind except for single vision stock. The question then really becomes is, well, which times wouldn't you use stock? Because stock is cheaper for the client. So when wouldn't you use stock lenses? And the answers are, well, first of all, someone said when the power, their prescription is high, so it's not
Unusual.
available. And how do we know that they're that unusual and not available? We look at our lens map, and we look at what their power asks for. And if it's over a certain power, you might start finding you have to move further and down the list until you can find a power where that's appropriate. So that's really the answer, is when it's out of power range. And so there may be power, and so that might be the first number, the plus or minus whatever. So let's say plus or minus, say 3. But then there's that second number, which is the, what's the second number on a prescription? Usually, and we put it in a minus form, it's the astigmatism. The astigmatism.
Yep.
And so astigmatism, so it might be say -1 or whatever it is, and then we've got the last number, which is the axis, saying the direction which we need to put that astigmatism at.
So
Just briefly, astigmatism is basically saying if one direction of the focus or the vision or the eyeball is at a certain focus, and that might be, in this example we might say, we use +3 as an example, and that in the other direction 90 degrees, assuming this is regular astigmatism, which most people are, the other direction might be plus, we'll use funny numbers to make it a bit easier to illustrate, -2.25. I'm going to change my example up there to being -0.75. So what this is actually showing is astigmatism is the difference between the two powers. In other words, at one direction of the image, maybe like if they're looking at some straight lines and crosses, they might have that being clear with one part of their vision, but the other direction of the crosses are all blurry because of the power opposite to that isn't in focus.
And that's not on everybody, is it?
No, some people have it,
that's just
some people don't.
yeah.
Some people have minimal amounts and some people have lots of it. And so the difference, so astigmatism is basically saying we're taking the higher plus power in the lens or the focus, so they need +3 in that direction. What is the difference between the two powers? The difference between the two powers is 0.75, and we always put it in minus. So we're starting at the most plus. To go down to the less plus direction, the difference is minus 0.75. And where is that orientated? Well, that power was actually orientated in this example at sort of the side-to-side direction rather than the up and down direction, if you like. So at 180. We'll change our example to be 180 if we like. If it was the other way around, if the thing, then it might be at 90. You can also have this in minus. So you might have minus 2, and in the other direction might be minus 3.5. So the most plus direction would be what? Which is the least minus or most plus of minus 2 and minus 350, which is the most plus?
Would be 350.
Well, I'll put it this way. We'll put it in pure dollars terms. Which is least in debt? Minus $2 at the bank or minus 350?
Two.
Minus $2 is the least in debt. How much is the least minus?
Yeah.
Most plus? Okay, this is the closest we've got to it, to being out of debt, and this is the more out of debt, okay? So if you think of plus and minus as in credit, debit, money in the bank, you owe the bank, this is the least plus.
Yeah.
So they're both either always minus or
No,
plus.
you can get mixed astigmatism, we'll go through that in a minute. That's a good question. So if you like, in this particular scenario, the prescription effectively is minus 2 with what is the difference between the two powers?
150.
150. And we always write minus. Sometimes the opt-owls do it differently and do it in plus, and then you get these funny scripts coming in probably from Dr. Casey most often, or the writers, and then they'll come in on a piece of paper, and then usually you'll ask someone to convert it into from a plus script into a minus script. We won't get into doing that, that gets a bit complex, but in relatively, it's a fairly simple mathematical process, okay? It's just they've written it around the other way. And we're sort of saying, well, which direction that is, we'll say that's in the 180 direction, the side-to-side direction. So that's actually what that looks like, okay? So of course, when we actually have a lens that's being made, it is being made relatively...
Top to bottom.
Yeah, well, no, it's being made to make sure that there is different curves, if you like. Another way of thinking of this is, rather than this being the prescription of the lens, we can think about the person's focus being a bit like a football. You have a more steep curve on the football and a slightly flatter curve on the football, so they have a different in the curves on the football, and therefore that creates a different, just like our wine glass, the curves create focus. So if one curve is steeper or more curved than the other, again, I suppose if we use that, you can sort of see the up and down isn't being made, it's been made a little bit bigger, but the side to side's been making really distorted because it's more curved that way than it is that way. So it creates a difference.